A 34-year-old Florida therapist was arrested on October 30th of 2024 after the authorities found that she'd had relations with a teenager she'd been counseling. Elizabeth Blanchard had groomed the victim while working at Epic Behavioral Healthcare in St. Augustine. She began having one-on-one sessions with the boy after initially meeting him during group therapy in June. As reported by the victim, Blanchard's behavior towards him initially involved flirting in person as well as over texts and calls. The situation escalated to Blanchard having unprotected relations with him multiple times. In one of the illicit meetups, the therapist had booked a room for them at a hotel in St. Johns County in the summer of 2024. Law enforcement reviewed footage of them walking into a room together and leaving a little over half an hour later. Some of Blanchard's abuses took place in her office, including her kissing the victim and offering to perform intimate acts on him. Additionally, the therapist reportedly provided the boy with various gifts, among which were vape pens and alcohol. She also set up a Cash App account for him and transferred him up to $9,000. During their communication, the therapist sent the teen over 50 nude photos and at one point referred to him as Babe in asking him to delete said photos. Blanchard faced multiple felony charges stemming from her abuse, and according to updates on the case from early November of 2024, she hadn't entered a plea. Number 7. Emily Dearden. On November the 14th of 2013, New York City man Kenneth Dearden awoke with an excruciating pain in his jaw and saw his wife, Emily, laid out on the floor of their Yonkers home. Kenneth would find that he'd been shot in the head as he slept. A bullet went through the base of his skull, passed below his ear canal, and became lodged in his left cheek. The man, who was at the time in his mid-40s, went on to have multiple surgeries during which the bullet was removed and a severed artery to his brain was mended. Emily, who worked as a psychologist and scanned new recruits for the NYPD, told detectives that she and her husband had been the victims of a home invasion. The woman claimed that the intruder had knocked her out after shooting her husband. The couple's 2 girls were inside the residence at the time, but they weren't harmed. The NYPD was immediately skeptical of Emily's version of events. The couple's burglar alarm hadn't been triggered, there were no signs of forced entry, and their Rottweiler hadn't reacted to the commotion. While Kenneth was recovering in the hospital, his wife washed her bedclothes, and when the NYPD returned to the address, she suspiciously asked them if they had a warrant to search the home. As the investigation continued, Emily and Kenneth continued living together, and she returned to her job with the police. Then in November of 2014, Kenneth sued his wife, alleging that she tried to kill him in his sleep to avoid a contentious divorce and start a new life with her lover. Since 2011, Emily had been having an on and off affair with a Texas man by the name of Warren Rodebush, who was also married. Shortly before the shooting, he'd ended things with his wife and pressured Emily to do the same. On November the 21st of 2014, about a week after Kenneth had sued her, Emily was arrested and charged with attempted murder, first-degree assault, attempted first-degree assault, and criminal possession of a firearm. The woman had initially claimed that there were no firearms in the house, but cops found multiple handguns in the basement, including a recently fired antique Derringer, the caliber of which matched the bullet removed from Kenneth's jaw. In February of 2017, Emily admitted to shooting her husband in the head under the felony charge of first-degree attempted assault. Westchester Supreme Court Judge Barry Warhit told Emily during sentencing, "You cemented for all time your legacy, a legacy that sadly you left to your children, your 2 daughters, a legacy that their mother shot their father in the head while he slept." The 49-year-old was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, along with 2.5 years of supervision. Number 6. Renee Hoberman. On October the 23rd of 2024, a child therapist from New York was arrested after an investigation found that she'd been behind the online dissemination of photos and videos depicting abuse. 36-year-old Renee Hoberman previously provided youth counseling services to children at South Oaks Hospital in Amityville from 2016 to 2021. At the time of her arrest, she worked as a therapist for children 17 and under at a mental health provider called Lifestance Health in Melville. The Department of Homeland Security's investigations unit began looking into her online activity, following multiple tips that came from KIK Messenger. As recently as October the 16th of 2024, Hoberman uploaded criminal content to several chats on the platform. While claiming to be a man in control of several underage victims, she described punishing the victims with abuse and uploaded videos depicting assaults. Under her assumed identity, she invited one chat user to visit and spank the victims. The complaint didn't indicate whether she was directly involved in the abuse featured in the distributed material. When Hoberman was arrested, several of her electronic devices were seized, including an iPhone, which she admitted belonged to her. In a hidden folder on the device, investigators found more photos and videos depicting assaults. According to the complaint, the child therapist admitted to using multiple accounts to upload the illicit content to KIK, Telegram, Discord, and WhatsApp. When she appeared in federal court in Central Islip, a judge ordered that she be held without bond. Number 5. Dennis Henderson. In January of 2015, Susan Winters was found dead at the Las Vegas home she shared with her husband, Dennis Henderson. Winters, a 48-year-old attorney, had ingested a fatal amount of painkillers and antifreeze. The woman's husband told the authorities that Winters had searched for the effects of antifreeze online the night before her death. A Clark County coroner concluded that there were no suspects in the death. The case was reopened in 2017 after local news outlets raised questions about the incident, and Winters' family hired private investigators. In February, Henderson was arrested on a murder charge. Internet searches pertaining to how long it would take ethylene glycol used in antifreeze to kill a person had indeed been made from the family computer. However, the latest searches occurred after Winters was already unconscious and nearly dead. She and Henderson were on the verge of separation, and the man's cocaine addiction had plunged him into deep debt. From her death, Henderson stood to gain $1 million inheritance and $1 million from her life insurance policy. Leading up to Winters' death, her husband had taken money from her bank account and deposited a $180,000 check into his own account. Prosecutors said that Henderson had waited for his wife to stop breathing before calling 911, and that he issued a do not resuscitate order for her at the hospital. In January of 2022, Henderson entered an Alford plea to the charge of voluntary manslaughter. The plea wasn't an admission of guilt, but recognition that prosecutors had sufficient evidence to potentially secure a conviction. In May of 2022, Henderson was handed a sentence of 3 to 10 years behind bars. Number 4. Maria Duarte. 45-year-old Maria Ximena Duarte struck up a conversation with a girl in her mid-teens as the latter was walking her dog near the Aloft Miami-Dade Hotel in Miami, Florida, on August 13th of 2024. During their interactions, Duarte, a licensed mental health professional, gained the teen's trust by telling her that she was a therapist. The unidentified girl thus began confiding in the older woman about her personal issues. The following day, she went back and forth between her home and the hotel several times to meet with Duarte. The latter offered her marijuana and alcohol before they went to a room at the hotel together. The therapist took pictures of the girl and sent them to 29-year-old Hermes Mayer, claiming that she was 21 years old and willing to have intercourse with him. The girl said that she wouldn't do so, but Duarte ignored her refusal. When Mayer arrived at the hotel room, Duarte had intercourse with him and made the teen record them, claiming that she was teaching her. At some point, Duarte's boyfriend, 46-year-old Jason Mojica, went to the room. The girl overheard Duarte telling her boyfriend that she was underage, followed by, "Can you believe that?" The therapist decided to leave Mojica alone with the girl in spite of the latter saying that she was uncomfortable. When she tried to get out of the room, the therapist reportedly pushed her back inside and told her to make Mojica feel good. The man exposed himself to the teen and forced her to perform an intimate act on him. The victim went to the authorities in the assault's aftermath, resulting in the arrest of Duarte and Mojica. The former appeared in court later in August on multiple charges that included human trafficking and lewd and lascivious battery. She lamented in court, saying, "I'm a psychologist, I'm a PhD, I will lose my license and my life," adding, "I need help. I've never even touched that girl, kissed her." As of October of 2024, Duarte was found incompetent to stand trial and committed to the Florida Department of Children and Families. The state's Department of Health suspended her license to practice, stating that she represented an immediate serious danger to the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Mojica, who was described as homeless at the time of the attack, was charged with battery, lewd and lascivious battery, and interference with custody. Number 3. Michael Lousada. On August 28th of 2016, Ella Jenner, went to the London clinic of Michael Lousada, a therapist specializing in intimate relations. In the past, Lousada had reportedly engaged in penile penetration as a therapeutic technique with dozens of clients. Jenna, who was at the time in her late 20s, sought Lousada's services because she was suffering from panic attacks during consensual intercourse due to abuse she'd suffered in her youth. During the £750 session, Lousada reportedly bragged that his manhood was like a laser beam that could burn up trauma. As the session unfolded, Jenna reportedly suffered a crippling panic attack that left her incapable of providing valid and informed consent to the ensuing relations. The woman would accuse Lousada of abusing her because he carried on with the session while she was unreactive. Jenna reported the incident to the Metropolitan Police, but the Crown Prosecution Service ultimately chose not to pursue criminal charges against Lousada. The latter maintained that the practice had been a legitimate form of therapy and that it repeatedly asked the woman if she wished to continue. Jenna launched a civil claim against the therapist, alleging personal injury and negligence. The civil case would be considered on a balance of probabilities rather than the standard of proof beyond reasonable doubt required by criminal prosecutions. In the summer of 2024, the High Court concluded that during the session, Jenna had suffered a full-blown dissociative panic attack, the implications of which would have been obvious to Lousada. The court determined that the therapist had chosen to ignore her symptoms, blinded by the confidence in his own ability to heal women. According to court records, Lousada's perception of reality became clouded by his sense of self-worth. Jenna, who'd since relocated to Australia, was awarded more than £200,000 in damages. Today's topic was requested by Sarita Maharshi 9981 and Stephen Thompson 385. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Ron Gadd. Leading up to the fall of 2022, Los Angeles man Ron Gadd had built a reputation as a successful marriage and family therapist whose Beverly Hills-based clinic boasted clients that included well-known athletes, actors, and wealthy business owners. In September of 2022, Gadd came across a teenager named Emma while on a site called Chat Avenue. Under the name DD, Gadd made the first move and asked the teen if she was interested in older men. They exchanged photos and the conversation turned explicit, even after Emma told Gadd that she was in her early teens. The married father of two, who was at the time in his late 40s, told her that she would be his little secret and asked her to call him Daddy. When Emma asked if he was okay with her being so young, Gadd replied, "Yup," and later sent her nude photos. Unbeknownst to the therapist, the profile had been set up by an undercover San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office detective. During their communication, Gadd told Emma that he loved her and that he would drive out to her and rent a hotel room where they could have relations. In October, Gadd drove roughly 180 miles to San Luis Obispo to meet Emma. He then began to circle Laguna Park, the agreed-upon rendezvous spot, in his Audi SUV. The therapist was seemingly nervous, as he'd begun suspecting that Emma wasn't who she claimed to be. Gadd proceeded to message the girl seeking confirmation that she was a 19-year-old university junior and that they'd been engaging in role play throughout their exchanges. He referenced the conversation they'd supposedly had upon first meeting in the chat room, during which Emma had told him she was an adult. Posing as the teen, the detective replied, I am not 19 and I do not go to your university. I really thought you were coming to see me." The detective had never claimed to be 19, and throughout their interaction, Gadd had behaved as if he thought he was speaking to a girl in her early teens. Without mentioning role play, the therapist asking for confirmation that Emma was an adult was regarded as a last-ditch effort to cover himself in case he was being set up. San Luis Obispo officers eventually conducted a traffic stop and arrested him. Gadd maintained that his conversation with Emma had been a misunderstanding and that he believed he was role-playing with a legal adult. Several of his digital devices were seized and searched. The police found videos of abuse towards minors, including files depicting real victims known to law enforcement. Gadd had distributed the material on the internet and shipped it to other states in December of 2021. He'd also made online searches and had bookmarked sites connected to similar abuse-related content. In addition to interacting with suspected minors online, Gadd was charged with distribution of the aforementioned videos and faced a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in federal prison. and a statutory minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. His case was ongoing according to the latest information available on the matter. Updates indicate that Gad's license to practice had expired in 2023, and due to his legal troubles, he wasn't able to get it renewed. If you thought therapists were supposed to be role models, then you ain't seen nothing yet. Our release about when clergies go wrong is lined up right after number 1. Stick around if you haven't seen that one yet. Number 1. Ross Canade. In the summer of 2024, Englishman Ross Canade was the lead psychologist at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust. He specialized in treating youth struggling with mental health issues, and the hospital where he worked had become controversial for helping children with gender transitions. On June the 1st of 2024, Canade connected with a boy in his mid-teens on the Grindr dating app. The teen made it clear to the 53-year-old therapist that he was underage, but their interaction continued and moved to WhatsApp, where it became intimate in nature. Canade and the victim arranged to meet up at a Nando's in Southgate, London, and then go to a park to have relations. Unbeknownst to the therapist, he was interacting with a decoy profile set up by vigilante predator hunters. The therapist was actually talking to an older person using the teen as bait. Canade met up with the boy on June the 6th of 2024. After they ate together at the restaurant, he was ambushed and surrounded by members of the vigilante group, who held him at the scene until the police arrived to arrest him. Canade subsequently admitted grooming and engaging in an explicit conversation with a minor, for which he was given concurrent suspended sentences totaling 18 months. He was also ordered to complete 35 sessions of an offender rehabilitation course and perform 150 days of unpaid work. Number 8. Christopher Gattis. A Virginia youth pastor was charged with triple murder in 2017 following the Thanksgiving slaying of his wife, stepdaughter, and the latter's boyfriend. The four of them lived together in the same home in Chester, but 58-year-old pastor Christopher Gattis didn't want the couple, named as Candice Coons, Andrew Bethorn, staying for long. His reluctance led to multiple arguments between him and the pair, both in their 30s. The man's wife, 58-year-old Jeanette, had become so concerned that Gattis, who worked at Grace Lutheran Church, would violently lash out that she'd asked his nephew to hide a gun for fear that he might use it against them. Then on Thanksgiving night, as the family was playing a board game, Gattis walked into the kitchen and opened fire on them. The two women were shot in the house while Bethorn was gunned down in the front yard. Following his arrest, Gattis told the police, "They all came after me," in spite of the fact that all three of the victims had died of gunshot wounds to the back. Gattis eventually pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Number 7. Travis Clark. On September the 30th of 2020, a passerby noticed that the lights in the St. Peter's and Paul Roman Catholic Church in Pearl River, Louisiana, were still on after hours. The witness approached the church and saw that the priest, identified as Travis Clark, was half naked on the altar, having relations with two women clad in corsets and high heels. They were later named as dominatrices Mindy Lynn Dixon and Melissa Cameron Cheng, aged 41 and 28 respectively. The trio were recording the scene with a cell phone and tripod-mounted camera. Law enforcement were called to the church and arrested Clark, along with the two dominatrices, on charges of obscenity, as the acts in which they'd engaged had occurred in a place open to the public view. Aside from the recording devices, the police confiscated adult toys and stage lights from the scene. Further investigation revealed that Dixon had announced the upcoming role-playing rendezvous on social media. The woman from Kent, Washington, posted that she was traveling to the New Orleans area to defile a house of God with another dominatrix. Clark was suspended from the archdiocese following his arrest, and a Vatican-headed probe was launched in the aftermath. The trio was bonded out and their charges were eventually changed to institutional vandalism, a felony, in March of 2021. If convicted, the trio faced up to 2 years in prison with or without hard labor and a fine of not more than $1,000 or both. Number 6. Joseph McClune. a former pastor at St. Joseph Parish in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, pleaded guilty in October of 2021 to 2 charges of mismanaging money. 58-year-old Joseph McClune's illegal activity had started in the late fall of 2011 when, during his first All Souls holiday as pastor of the church, he began depositing donations into an account named St. Joseph's Activity Account. It was off the parish's books and hence not subjected to the review of the Archdiocese or its financial council, meaning that McClune had free reign over monetary contributions from weddings, funerals, second collections, and other sources. Over the course of 7 years, he stole nearly $100,000 and used the funds for personal interests. They included luxury accommodations, travel, and dining. Even though he'd officially taken a vow of celibacy, McClune spent a portion of the funds on men whom he met through various dating apps and with whom he was having intimate relationships. He made 10 deposits in 2018 to an inmate at a New York correctional facility with whom he'd become acquainted on Grindr. McClune had made payments totaling $1,720 in previous years to other men that he connected with on the app. His unchecked spending was eventually discovered by the authorities, and he was arrested in 2019. Following his guilty plea, he was sentenced to 5 years of probation in order to pay over $30,000 in restitution, in addition to writing apology letters and performing hundreds of hours of community service. Number 5. Mariam Mbula. London woman Mariam Mbula was a pastor at the Salvation Proclaimers Anointed Church, also known as SPAC Nation, founded by Toby Adeboyega in 2008. In the late 2010s, the church was praised by the media, law enforcement, and local government for helping young people abandon gangs and turn to faith. The church enjoyed some success by using ex-gang members to show their churchgoers the consequences of a criminal lifestyle. It attracted younger members through music such as its Hope Dealers rap group and by promoting a designer aesthetic. It involved its pastors donning designer clothing and accessories, living in luxurious homes, or driving around in high-end vehicles, some of which had the word pastor stylized on their license plates. SPAC Nation steadily grew in popularity and influence, with one of its pastors, Enrique Uadai, listed as one of London's most influential people by the Evening Standard in October of 2019. Mbula had also particularly captivated the public through her story about turning her life around after being jailed for fraud in her 20s while she was pregnant. When the Metropolitan Police started investigating the church in November of 2019, they discovered that SPAC Nation operated like a cult by pressuring vulnerable young people into donating everything they had to the church. They were asked to take out loans, donate blood, and make all matter of personal sacrifices in order to provide seed for the church, an internal phrase which meant raising money for it. I don't care what you guys have to do to raise your seed, you're going to raise it, church founder Adeboyega was quoted as saying at one point. There were also allegations of teenagers being pressured into having relations with older church members, as well as them being left vulnerable for exploitation and abuse at the safe houses ran by SPAC Nation. Further investigation into Mbula revealed that the pastor, then in her early 30s, had at least 13 convictions for 34 offenses, 27 of which were for fraud and dishonesty. She'd been jailed in the UK, Belgium, and Spain, while also being accused of heading a criminal gang in Italy which targeted boutiques through debit card scams. Testimonies from her many victims and a deeper examination of Mbula's criminal activity were part of a BBC 3 documentary called Catch Her If You Can. As of June 2020, SPAC Nation was forced to shut down after being found insolvent, but the investigation into its nefarious affairs continued. Number 4. John Bernard Fight. On April the 16th of 1960, Texas schoolteacher and beauty queen Irene Garza disappeared after last being seen heading to confession at a church in McAllen. Following a massive volunteer search, the 26-year-old's body was discovered 5 days later in a canal of the Rio Grande Valley. She'd been beaten and abused while unconscious and strangled to death. The ensuing investigation was complicated by the fact that most of the evidence from her body had been washed away in the canal. Father John Bernard Fite, aged 27, eventually became a suspect in Garza's violent killing, as he'd been the last person to have seen her while taking her confession. Fellow priests had noticed scratch marks on his arms after midnight mass, and also noted the irregularity of him taking the young woman's confession in the church rectory. Other attendees claimed that his confession line had moved slowly on the night, as he'd been in and out of the sanctuary. Fite blamed his absence on breaking his glasses and explained the scratches by claiming he'd forgotten his keys and had to climb to the second floor of his house. McAllen police deemed that he'd passed the polygraph, but the results were later deemed inconclusive. Fite subsequently confessed to the killing while at a monastery in Missouri, but a monk named Dale Kenny initially didn't disclose the information. In the 1970s, Fite left the priesthood and moved to Arizona, got married, and had 3 children. The investigation into Garza's death stagnated for decades, but was reopened in 2014. A re-examination of the evidence led to 83-year-old Fite's arrest in Scottsdale, Arizona in February of 2016. Kenny testified against him in the trial that followed, and the former priest, who at the time suffered from kidney and bladder cancer, was ultimately convicted of Garza's murder. Prosecutors asked for a 57-year sentence, symbolic of how much time had passed since her death. Fite was eventually given life in prison and on February the 12th of 2020 passed away from natural causes. Number 3. Kenneth Allen Keith. Kentucky couple Michael and Angela Hockensmith, both in their 30s, were gunned down at their pawn shop in Danville on the morning of September the 20th of 2013. Killed alongside them was 60-year-old gold dealer Daniel Smith, a regular at the ABC Gold Games and More business they co-owned. The couple's children were inside the store, but they were unharmed and called 911 after the intruder had fled. The Hockensmith's son witnessed the shooting and described the gunman as being heavy-set and wearing a fake beard. Within a few days, police established 48-year-old Kenneth Allen Keith, a pastor at a local church, as a person of interest in the triple murder. Keith used to own part of the pawn shop, and Michael was his store manager before the couple became partners with the other co-owner. The pastor operated another gold business and reportedly held a grudge against the Hockensmiths for choosing to sell to Smith over him. Keith's alibi of having gone to the Veterans Affairs Hospital at the time of the murders was swiftly dismantled, while a briefcase carrying roughly $40,000 taken from Smith during the incident was also traced back to him. His search history included how to attach fake beards, how to bury money with GPS coordinates, and background checks on the victims. Keith initially maintained his innocence, but a few months before his trial, in August of 2017, pleaded guilty to the triple murder, for which he was sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. James Flanders. In October of 2011, Florida woman Marie Carlson was reported missing after she'd sent loved ones a mysterious message claiming she was leaving Fort Walton Beach. Her car was subsequently located at the airport, but there was no indication that she'd boarded a flight. Prior to her disappearance, 37-year-old Carlson had had a newborn daughter with James Flanders. She was in a polygamous relationship with the man, a pastor at Calvary Emerald Coast Church, and his wife Tanya. The trio had been living together, and upon learning about the secret arrangement, law enforcement interviewed Flanders as a person of interest. He claimed to have left the house on the evening of October the 17th, maintaining that Carlson was already gone by the time he'd returned. Tanya had reportedly been out with the newborn around the same period. Flanders' story was regarded as suspicious because Carlson still had money in her bank account and her belongings were in the home. There was no body, however, and the evidence was insufficient for charges to be brought against the pastor. Roughly 3 months after Carlson's disappearance, he moved to Arizona with Tanya and the baby, subsequently filing for termination of the mother's parental rights. A break in the case came after it had gained national attention from being featured on the television show Cold Justice. In April of 2015, Carlson was arrested and brought back to Florida on second-degree murder charges. He eventually confessed to killing Carlson, which he claimed was an accident, in favor of the lighter manslaughter charge. Flanders maintained that he'd been arguing with her over how to raise their daughter, but as tensions escalated, he bear-hugged the woman and didn't let go until she stopped breathing. Flanders led the police to the body, which he'd buried in his backyard. In July of 2016, he was given the maximum prison sentence of 15 years. Number 1. Clarence Smith Jr. In 2020, an investigation into a charity operation headed by a Chicago minister revealed that he'd grossly misused funds meant to fuel a food program for underprivileged children and adults. 45-year-old Reverend Clarence Smith Jr. of the New Life Impact Church was a sponsor of the child and adult care food program. Court documents indicated that the church's role was to provide nutritious snacks and meals to children, the elderly, and those with disabilities, for which the organization would be reimbursed by the state of Illinois. Investigators found that starting from October of 2015, Smith had begun over-reporting the number of people his church had helped, billing the state for $1 million, which was paid in 2 checks the following year. The Reverend deposited the money into the church's account and then wrote checks or withdrew cash for expenses that had nothing to do with the food program or other charity endeavors. They included $142,000 which Smith used to buy a 2015 Bentley Flying Spur luxury sedan for himself. He then tried to cover up his illicit spending by telling the Illinois Board of Education that the records of the people his church had presumably helped had been destroyed in a flood. As of the latest information available on the matter, Smith pleaded not guilty to 4 counts of fraud in the U.S. District Court. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be able to read minds or talk to animals? Let us know in the comments section below.